Okay. So I guess, so Chen, I guess one question, like from your experience of being a man of faith and being religious, like from those that you've interacted with, like what would you say the general thoughts are on predestination versus like free will? Because I know in terms of having like a solid foundation in faith, there's generally like I have some friends that I've had these conversations with. They're very pro predestination. So everything's already written. God has a plan. You're born, you go through life, you die. But a lot of other individuals that I've interacted with, like I'm kind of on the fence of both. They kind of believe that you act as you go and you kind of just live life as it is. And then from there, I kind of feel like there is some dissonance between like being solely faith based versus taking a logical, more practical approach to life.
Hmm. Well, let me preface this for the sake of the audience here in explaining briefly what a doctrine of predestination would be. According to typically the Reformation movement, a predestination is the idea that God unilaterally decides and causes what happens. And I sense, Jay, that you perhaps don't agree with that, and I would follow in that camp. I would disagree with that as a proper understanding of the sovereignty of God. But I wouldn't say that folk, just because they hold to a robust doctrine of predestination like that, that somehow they are irrational. From the ancient Greek fatalists who held extreme versions of something like that, all the way to a friend of mine who just put out a book a year or so ago, Guillaume Bignon, the French philosopher who just put out a book on defending this sort of Calvinist understanding. I think it's called Blaming God or something like that. And he gives a nice, robust philosophical defense of his position. And he's entitled to that view, but I don't think it's a matter of saying, oh, he just holds on to it by faith. Now, that having been said, typical conversations with Christians who confess predestination as such, they will typically say, when you ask them about complications of the doctrine, like how do you reconcile human decision making in a world where God unilaterally makes us do everything that we do, this is a controversy known as compatibilism or incompatibilism, depending upon where you fall into, and you can have a debate or discussion about it. But the typical Calvinist might say, it's just a mystery to me. I can't reconcile it, so it's just a mystery. And I think that we're entitled to that, as if there would be good reasons for the doctrine in the first place.
Huh. That's interesting, Shandon. I had never considered, philosophical compatibilism as it relates to free will when considering, I guess, Calvinism or this predestination from God. I've always understood compatibilism, at least in the philosophical discussion of free will, to be a response to the hard determinist, right? But that makes sense that you could use the exact same principle of compatibilism, which I got my degree a long time ago. I haven't been teaching it like you, so forgive me if I'm not quite as accurate in my definitions of philosophical terms these days. But if I remember correctly, compatibilism is the idea that even though we can accept determinism in the universe, the laws of physics and cause and effect, which essentially makes it so that any decision we make, we could not have done otherwise. We don't have contra-causal freedom, I believe it's called, which is the ability to have done something else. Well, once a decision or action is undertaken, that was the result of a string of occurrences that are all in a long chain of cause and effect that date back to essentially the beginning of time, the beginning of matter, or what have you. And so essentially, the compatibilist, then says, even though we can accept that principle scientifically, that we do not have contra-causal freedom, perhaps that's not really, that doesn't really get rid of free will. Essentially, compatibilism is a way of redefining free will to mean, rather than the ability to have done otherwise, let's just define free will as the ability to do what you want. Almost the feeling itself of free will and being a free actor is what gives you free will. So essentially what you're saying is you can apply that same principle of compatibilism and kind of redefining free will, if you consider, instead of the universe and the laws of physics creating a deterministic universe and our actions kind of being predetermined, you could say, okay, it's God, not the laws of physics, but God is predetermining the entire sequence of actions throughout the universe, throughout all time. And then you can use this sort of compatibilist principle to say, well, that doesn't mean we don't have free will. We still should try to do good and make good decisions, because the point is that we are doing ultimately what we want. I mean, I think it gets a little tricky if you're trying to then still say that, God can punish you for wrong action or wrong decision. I feel like it might fall short there, because that still doesn't seem fair then if you don't have that contra-causal freedom. It's like, yeah, you kind of felt like you were doing what you want, but you really couldn't have done otherwise, and now you go to hell for example, or for doing having the wrong decision or the wrong belief. That doesn't quite seem to satisfy that issue to me, in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with your sentiment there. And so more sophisticated Calvinists will identify their position as theological determinism, precisely because it is essentially the same thing as a sort of non-supernaturalist version of determinism. The antecedent causes wouldn't be plurality in various physical laws and constants and so forth. It would be in God, who directs and controls everything down to the molecule, insofar as unilaterally only giving one history of the universe, as it were. And so only one set of events is going to obtain, precisely because God makes it that way. And I agree with it. I think it has problems with culpability and so forth, which is why Bignon, whom I cited a moment ago, entitles his book Blaming God, because that's precisely one of the number one charges against this Calvinist construct, is that God makes us sin, so to speak, and then we're responsible for it, which is profoundly, unacceptable. But the defense they offer, to their credit, is far more sophisticated. But nevertheless, that you have captured accurately the spirit. So whether it's been a while since you've dabbled in philosophy, you seem to have a pretty good handle on it here.
Well, thanks. Glad I remember a few things I learned back then.
No, that was great. But to bring it back a little bit to faith and logic, one thing that we were talking about, like, Mike, it seemed like you were trying to say, well, if we have faith in this and it leads to this conclusion logically, and we don't think that conclusion is fair or makes sense, then are you saying like we should adjust the faith? So that's kind of what I'm curious about. We can have evidence, then we can have faith, and with those combination, it leads us to new beliefs, but those new beliefs might be contradictory. And if that's the case, do we adjust the evidence or do we adjust the faith? Like, what would that be?
Are you asking me?
This is really for you both, but I guess I would ask Shandon too.
Well, saying that, offering the possibility of adjusting the evidence sounds a bit nefarious, in the sense that, are we going to involve ourselves in confirmation bias or something like that? Are we going to fix the evidence so we only pay attention to what we like and start sifting out what we don't like? I do think that faith is in gradations. I don't want to give the misimpression of the binariness of faith. I think faith is to be understood, for lack of better words, inductively. And so just as an inductive argument can grow in strength or be depleted of its strength, depending upon new evidence that may come into the fray, faith could be proportioned likewise. And you see this in the New Testament. You have people who just have an unfettering faith, and like Peter, for example, but then you also have a John the Baptist who sends a couple of people to Jesus to ask the question, hey, are you even the Messiah? You know, we don't even know anymore. Or the man that comes to Jesus and says, and a healing takes place. And then he says, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief, help me. So I think there's a recognition that faith comes in gradations. And so, which is why I defined it as that which is in proportion to the evidence.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that. And like also too, so would you say like that is a more common approach within like the faith-based community? Like maybe it's just not as publicized as you would say?
Well, probably few people think philosophically deep with some depth about this issue. I think the average person may say something along the lines of, I believe because God is a reality to me, which is a very, very unsophisticated version of what Alvin Plantinga identifies as a properly basic belief. That I had breakfast this morning, for example. I can't demonstrate that happened to me, but somebody would say, but I have what I believe, I have this memory, I have the experience, or so I think I did. I've been appeared to eating breakfastly, such a thing. And though I can't prove it, no one can disprove it, I'm entitled to that experience. And so that's a respectable position to hold that is not tethered to religion or not. You have, again, a philosophical camp, typically in what's called externalism, which will hold that you could have reliable beliefs that are made reliable for conditions within your circumstances and proper function of who you are, belief-forming faculties and so forth. If you have every reason to think that your belief-forming faculties are functioning properly, then when one of the beliefs that's coughed up is belief in God, why should I think suddenly that one's unreliable? So that's a sophisticated way to accommodate someone who says, I just believe on faith. And there have been people historically which have decried evidence. They're just far and few between. You have someone like Aram Hare or Karl Barth, the great theologian, back to, I think it was Cicero or Seneca that said, I believe because it's absurd. But to what extent they really mean, hey, I'm embracing my faith precisely because it's idiotic or ridiculous or refuted by the evidence, I don't think they would say that. I don't know of anyone.
Just got off the clock, just got on my chill. Called on my homie Brent to see what be the deal. What you trying to do? I'm just trying to heal. Hella floated, never bloated's what I'm trying to feel. Hop in the whip and